Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening. My name is Leila Sadeghi. I'm the director of the Guarini Institute. We're a nonpartisan institute located here on the campus. We focus on public policy issues that we think are relevant to citizens across New Jersey. We're also generously funded by Congressman Frank Guarini, who's here with us. Thank you. Thank you for your continued support. And Governor Mukherji is also here with us. Thank you for being here and your support. Okay, so today we're talking about the push for gun control and the Second Amendment. We have a wonderful group of panelists here today, and we appreciate their being here with us. I'm going to turn over the mic to Judge Kevin Callahan, who was an attorney and started his career with Guarini & Guarini Law Firm. He then later went on to private practice. In the mid-'70s, he served as a judge in Jersey City Municipal Court. In 1984, he was appointed to the Superior Court bench as the youngest judge in Hudson County and served 27 years, with over 25 of those years in criminal court, and for 8 years as the presiding judge. He currently serves as a professor with us in criminal justice, so thank you for also being here to co-moderate this panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Leila. Also like to introduce a few people that are here, and we appreciate it greatly. The Chief of Detectives, Gene Rubino, is in the back there, and from Hudson County, we welcome you. Also, I'd like to introduce Professor Larson, our chair of our Criminal Justice Department, who's was co-sponsoring of this. Professor, thank you. And also our provost, Jerry O'Sullivan, who is a marvelous man and is now bringing in chairs as part of his provost duties. So really, truly amazing. This is what happens in St. Peter's University. Everybody pitches in at every level, no matter what their title is. We're going to do this in a format where I will be taking a seat in 1 second, and Leila and I will alternate in asking questions directed to the different panelists, and that'll be the first part of our program. And then the second part of our program, we would open it up to the audience. Just a few things before I introduce everybody. This is obviously, the purpose of this is not to, is to open up calm and dispassionately as possible dialogue of the issues that are raised in the Second Amendment, given the violence that also we are terribly experiencing over the last number of years. And that is the purpose here, and that's the way that we do things in universities, particularly St. Peter's University. I was privileged to graduate from here. We always have open dialogue. We open it to the public, and we will afford the public to ask their questions. But of course, this is not a rally. This is a discussion to see if we can come to some common grounds to address this issue that is at the very top of our problems in this country, among others. We have put together a panel which we think is balanced. We hope it is. I'm sure you'll find that it is. And of course, it's first person I have great pleasure in introducing and giving a little bio about is Governor Florio, Jim Florio, and I thank you for being here. St. Peter's, our university, has 2 former governors here. And a Congressman Guarini, and that speaks volume to what St. Peter's means to this city and this state. Governor Florio served as the 49th governor of New Jersey from 90 to 94. He entered public service in 69, serving 3 terms in the New Jersey General Assembly. He also served in the U.S. House of Representatives from the 1st Congressional District from 74 to 90. He is a founding partner of Florio, Perucci, Steinhardt, and Fader, based in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. He's also the chair of the firm's Energy, Environmental Law, and Governmental Regulatory Affairs and Healthcare Law Schools. I have cut these bios down because we'd be here for the whole 2 hours if I did everybody's bio, what they've accomplished in their life. He is also a senior fellow for Public Policy Administration at the Blaunstein School of Public Policy in Rutgers. Currently serves on the Board of Directors of New Jersey Health Care Quality Institute, co-chair of the Regional Plan Association New Jersey Committee, and a member of the Board of Trustees. Will be joining us in a few minutes is Assemblyman from the 33rd District here, Raj Mukherji, who represents us. He is a lawyer and healthcare investor, former deputy mayor and former sergeant in the Marine Corps, sits on the Assembly Budget, Commerce, Economic Development, and Labor Committees. At 24, was appointed commissioner and chair of the Jersey City Housing Authority, the youngest in city history, and 3 years later he was appointed deputy mayor of New Jersey, and at 28 he won a 6-way Democratic primary election for Assembly, and later won the general election, re-elected in 2015. Sitting next to Layla is Prosecutor Suarez. She became the Hudson County prosecutor here in July of 2015. She was a judge with the Superior Court of New Jersey since February of 2010 in the civil and family part in Hudson, and I had the distinct pleasure of meeting Judge Suarez, now Prosecutor Suarez, and sitting with her and serving with the honor with her of a number of years with her at the bench when she was in Hudson. She presided over many trials and brings a tremendous balance and a new perspective as the chief law enforcement officer in Hudson County. She's a lot of firsts, but she is at all times the prosecutor, whether that's female, male, heritage, makes no difference. This is the most qualified person to be prosecutor of this Hudson County at this time, and I mean that sincerely. Prior to going into the bench, she was a Bergen County counsel responsible for the legal representation to the county executive at many departments, and she was City of Hoboken Corporation Counsel and the Union City Housing Authority, so she knows Hudson County very, very well. Over at the far right, Alex Roubian is the president of the Second Amendment Association of Society, in New Jersey. He was appointed president in 2015. He began extensively involved with the Second Amendment after witnessing a murder while walking home from work. He saw firsthand the importance of the Second Amendment and having the right to self-defense. He began volunteering extensively with the society and was appointed as president last January, 2015, He's testified before Law and Public Safety Committee and has been a panelist and guest lecturer at many political and Second Amendment functions. He was the sole Second Amendment defender on a panel when Congressman Bill Pascrell, Senator Loretta Weinberg, and New Jersey Assemblyman Johnson. And last but not least is Jef Henninger. Jef is the owner of the law offices bearing his name. The firm has offices all over the state of New Jersey. He is an expert in issues such as firearms, criminal defense, family law, civil matters, and real estate. He works with the New Jersey Second Amendment Society in an effort to change New Jersey's guns law. And that's why we're here. I had, with 27 years on the bench, almost all in criminal, seen what has happened over the course of those many years. And we'll direct questions to each of the panelists, and I will start first. And let me just take my seat on the other side. Governor, can you hear?
It's on.
All right. I guess I have to say Governor Florio, since we have Governor McGreevey also in the room. But prefacing this, Governor Florio, and putting the first question to you, and the format would be that we would ask each speaker, since we're limited on time, we have a number of panelists, we'd like to maybe keep the answers within brief, 3 minutes or so, and then if any other panelist feels that they would like to say something relative to the issue, fine. Although we will ask questions myself, alternating with Layla Sadehi, of all the questions that we think should be directed to the appropriate panelist. And then after that, we'll open it up to the public. Now, Governor Florio, in 2015 alone, there were 372 mass shootings, killing 475 people and wounding 1,870 more. Additionally, there were 13,286 people killed by U.S. firearms, with over 25,000 others injured. Furthermore, there were 64 school shootings in 2015. Given these statistics, should the Second Amendment, as originally adopted in 1791, be modified or changed, and what impact, if any, will the new president have upon that process, as we will have no presidents next year?
Well, I think in some respects we ought to think of this as an epidemic, a gun violence epidemic. And it's on a weekly basis. We hear about something yesterday in Michigan, 6 people were killed. So this is something that's very serious. But we should treat it as an epidemic, a public health problem as well. And public health problems, whether it be TB or Ebola or whatever, we try to get people engaged and informed about it. And then we deal with the problem, whatever the problem is, by virtue of having the public informed. This one is even more important in some respects, this gun violence epidemic that we have. Because in a regular epidemic of public health, there's nobody arguing for tuberculosis. There's nobody arguing for Ebola. In this case, we have folks on the other side who feel strongly about how it is we address this healthcare epidemic. So I think that's something, a good way of thinking about it. In terms of just the Second Amendment, no one is arguing that the Second Amendment exists, although you could make that argument. By the way, if you go into the history of the Second Amendment at the time of the Founding Fathers, what you had was 2 factions, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the people who wanted the big central government and the people who wanted state governments. And the Second Amendment was debated, there's a record, was debated. The Anti-Federalists who were concerned about a big government, they were mostly concerned about a standing army at the national level, and maintained that the state militias, state by state by state, could be mobilized to defend the country. That's why the Second Amendment talks about the right to bear arms by state militias. That was the rationale for it. So the original intent, people who go through court cases, if the original intent was to be advised and carried out, that's the original intent. But be that as it may, the fact of the matter is that really what we're talking about is limitations on the Second Amendment. And even Judge Scalia, the late Judge Scalia, who was a big supporter of the Second Amendment, conceded the fact that there's an ability to have reasonable limitations on the Second Amendment. Then the question becomes, what's reasonable? Is it reasonable to have 40% of the gun owners in this country not be subject to scrutiny in terms of background checks? Is it reasonable to buy police vests for our policemen to protect them and then not outlaw 50 caliber guns that are armor-piercing, cop-killer bullets? There's a whole series of things that are really unreasonable. Is it reasonable to prohibit terrorists from getting on airplanes and yet not prohibit terrorists from having guns? That's the test. That's the drill that we all ought to go through. In good faith on all sides of the issue, find out what's a reasonable restriction. We all could agree an insane person should not have a gun. A habitual wife beater probably should not have a gun. So the question is not so much who wins the argument or not, but how do we, good people of good faith, come to a minimum average position in terms of what is restriction that's reasonable and what's not.
And just briefly, the second part of that, obviously there is now a vacancy, which I understand the Republicans in Washington had avowed that they will not allow any nominee to go through until after the election. This is vital, is it not, relative to the Second Amendment as to who is appointed after the conservative Scalia has left?
I think most of the things I've talked about would not be controversial. So what we have to have is someone on the bench. I mean, obviously we would hope we'd have a full majority on the bench that goes and tries to strike that midpoint. What is a reasonable restriction on the right to have guns? And I think that's something that we can achieve with some sense of moderation, some sense of good faith negotiation on all sides.
Anyone else? Before Layla gets to the second question, I think I'm remiss if I don't read the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Those few words are what brings us all here today and what has been the focal point of much of our society over as long as I've been here.
Do we have an opportunity to respond to that? Or?
Yes, if you would like to respond for a minute or two, and then we'll move on. I'm sorry, let me introduce again. This is Alexander Roubian. Roubian, excuse me, I'm sorry.
No problem. So, as the governor was discussing about restrictions and different types of caliber firearms, for me, it doesn't matter what kind of firearm anybody uses, but when a criminal has the intent, criminal is not going to obey the laws. Criminal is not going to use a 50 caliber or a .308 caliber. Criminal is going to use whatever weapon that he wants. And if the governor actually believed in the strength of his own convictions, he banned a huge amount of firearms in the early 90s when he was governor. But if you look at the statistics, while he was a governor, the crime rates went up. So if the notion that by banning things, we're going to actually prohibit crimes from occurring, then the number should have gone down. But from 1989 to 1993, the crime rates went up tremendously, including firearm use. That's because criminals don't obey these laws. They can care less. So, the fact that we're arguing here that, well, the Second Amendment was actually meant for the government or the militias, in these very defined terms, but the First Amendment, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and so on, the rest of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and the Third Amendment, all the other Bill of Rights are the same. It's about the powers of the people, not about the powers of the government. So I completely disagree with the notion that there was some secret hidden meaning in the Second Amendment that actually gave the powers to the government or the militia, and everything else was for the people. The Bill of Rights begins, we the people, not we the government provide these rights to the people. They're codified. And then if you want to look at just fundamental basic human rights, because the Bill of Rights does not issue us our rights, it codifies them in word of law. If I were born anywhere in the world, I should have the freedom of speech. I should have the right and ability to protect myself with whatever I feel is the most suitable. What might be suitable for me to use for self-defense might be very different from Jef, or a senior citizen, or some of my disabled friends, or most of the women that I train. That's an individual choice. But when you make laws that target everybody and not define between criminal and lawful activity, that's when you turn honest people, like in New Jersey today, where we have an actual epidemic of innocent people making innocent mistakes that had no criminal intent, going to jail for 5 to 7 years. That's the problem. The problem is that we have women like Carol Bowen, who's waiting based on your reasonable expectations of background checks and whatnot. They're being murdered. Carol Bowen was murdered while she was waiting permission from the government to be able to defend herself against her psycho ex-felon that was murdered her in her driveway and used a knife. That's why the Second Amendment exists.
Thank you very much.
Can I just respond to that briefly?
Just briefly, sir.
I mean, if you follow the conclusion of that logic, we shouldn't have laws against murder because there will be murders notwithstanding the laws. So the whole idea of somehow, if we can't be perfect, we should not have any laws or restrictions on things. And the other point with regard to the classification of weapons that we've outlawed here in New Jersey, these are military assault weapons. And what we did is had the debate, and 88% of the people supported what we did in New Jersey. And they supported it because we framed this in terms of, is it really in the interest of the public to have access to Uzis and AK-47s? Public came in and said, 88%, no, we don't want to have those weapons in New Jersey.
Thank you, Governor. I'll turn it over to, thank you also, Alexander. Dr. Sadehi?
Thank you. This question is for Prosecutor Suarez. In 2015, we had the highest number of homicides in Hudson County since 2010, when 36 people were murdered. Furthermore, in Jersey City alone, there were 86 shootings last year. Based on your position as the county prosecutor, what percentage of these involved illegal guns? Where are they predominantly coming from? And what can be done to reduce these statistics?
So I think all of us agree on something, and that is that this is an epidemic. And this epidemic is touching certain areas, certain class of people, certain cultures very differently than it affects others. And I can tell you, and I think you all know, that it's striking the inner cities a lot worse than most other places. And again, I'm generalizing. What we saw in Hudson County was certainly the case. Just so we're clear, the guns that we see are very different than the guns that the governor and Mr. Roubian are discussing. We're discussing illegal guns. That's what we see on the street. Guns that were illegally obtained, that nobody registered for, nobody sought to get a firearm for. Nothing was ever done to attempt to get a firearm in a legal way. Young adults, I want to say kids, but I'll leave it to young adults, and typically within the ages of 18 and mid-20s is what we're seeing. They're able to obtain guns very readily. and they carry them, and this is normal for them. It's normal for kids in an inner city to be carrying guns either at their waist, have one at home, and this is common in their culture. What we see, Doctor, to address your point, typically is that they're coming from the South, they're coming from Virginia, from South Carolina, they're coming from Pennsylvania. And as much as we're doing what we can, it's tough. It's tough because it's so easy to hide a gun. You could go down to Virginia, you could buy a gun pretty readily, you could stick it in a duffel bag and get on a Greyhound bus, you could get in your car, throw it in the trunk of your car, and for the most part, there's no consequence, unless for some reason you get stopped and somehow searched. I think I've answered your question, although I think there was, one more thing, just in terms of what we're doing. I'll just tell you from the perspective of the prosecutor's office, we are working closely with Jersey City and Jersey City Police Department. Our municipal task force, our gang task force, they work very closely hand in hand, and we spend quite a bit of time in those areas that we consider to be most problematic. And we spend quite a bit of time speaking to people within that community and seeing where are their problems, who should we be concerned with, are there warrants for any of the people that we think there are problems. It's proven to be very effective, and we'll continue doing that. It's not 100%, and unfortunately there is nothing that's 100%, but that's what we've been doing of late.
And if I may, that brings up a great point, because that is a point that is not made often enough. What we hear about is these mass shootings where 5, 7, 15 people were killed. What we don't hear about is what is usually the people in the inner cities, usually minorities, that are being gunned down on a daily basis, and nobody cares. There's no big press conference, there's no big push for anything to change. It's, well, they're minorities, it's okay, but a couple people get killed in an office and the whole country flips out. And yet, that's when people want to harm legal gun owners' rights. When people that have illegal guns, those are the people, as Alexander said before, they don't care about the laws. Those are the ones that are committing most of the violence. New Jersey has some of the most strictest gun laws in this state. And you heard the doctor, the statistics that she's provided. So our laws are not working at all. And yet, legal gun owners, and some of them are here today, we appreciate their support here today, that they're the ones that are having their rights infringed. I have people that call me up that have to wait 2 years just to get a gun. That's absurd. And I have one of my most recent clients was an actor that he was shooting a scene, and they said, here's a gun for the scene. It turned out to be a real gun. He got arrested, and he's looking at 5 to 10 years in prison because of the way our laws are situated. So, and there's so many countless examples of people like that are innocent people that are getting caught up in New Jersey's ridiculous laws. Meanwhile, the murder rates and the use of illegal guns is not stopping, it's only increasing.
Thank you.
I'd like to.
I'd like to move on to the next point, and it's going to be addressed to you and Jeff as well, and we can always go back to another point, but we do want to get through this, and we appreciate the passion with everyone at this table brings to their responsibilities. And we'd like to introduce Assemblyman Mukherji. How are you?
Your Honor,
Thank you. We gave you a wonderful introduction in your absence, so I'm not going to do it again, but thank you very much for coming, Assembly. I would address this. I was going to address this to you, Jef Henninger, counsel, and also to you, Alexander. In 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court in District of Columbia versus Heller handed down the landmark decision that the Second Amendment protects an individual's rights to possess and carry firearms, whereas the argument had always been it was a governmental right relative to the issue. In a later case in 2010, McDonald versus Chicago, this decision was extended to state and local governments. My question is, we have 300 million, the last time I checked, guns for roughly 100 million people, with many, many people owning more than 10. How do these laws impact gun control? Whichever gentleman would like to answer, Mr. Roubian.
Yeah, actually, if I can correct you, the Heller decision, which Dick Heller and I are actually good friends, so I know the case very well, it does not provide the individual the right to carry a firearm in public. It's only to possess a firearm. So in my opinion, how does this impact gun control? Not enough. Because in New Jersey, we have a de facto ban on concealed carry. This is something that even New York City allows. It is something that every other state, 49 other states, allow an individual to carry a firearm legally for self-defense. And because of this, this is what causes the gangs to run rampant in our state, because they know they will have unarmed defense. 10 out of 10 criminals will agree they prefer a disarmed victim than an armed victim, because the only thing a criminal cares about is a person harming their life. If you don't believe that, just YouTube armed self-defense, and you'll see criminal after criminal after criminal running away from an armed a person that was armed that they were going to try to harm. So, in my opinion, I don't think it goes far enough, because I think it's absurd, the New Jersey gun laws. The New Jersey gun laws, in my opinion, are extremely restrictive, too restrictive, and they're violating our natural and our constitutional rights. It's absurd that people are literally being murdered while waiting for their permits to be processed. People are waiting 1, 2, 3 years. In Jersey City alone, the McGovern case, Michael McGovern, he sued the city because the city broke state law and was actually requiring all these additional forms and requirements, and he waited 3 years for that. He actually ended up winning, and to this day, Jersey City is still violating the law. So I don't care if you agree with the laws or not, but why is it the police and the state attorney general have the right to break the laws, but if I were to do it, I'd be serving 10 years in prison? I still don't get an answer on that.
Yeah, and Heller has been ruled many times to have literally just about no applicability to New Jersey, because when it's brought up in the context of carry permits, and case after case has basically said that that case was really focused on Washington D.C.'s law about possession in your home, and they were just trying to eliminate all possession of firearms, and that they believe that Heller does not impact a state's right to basically regulate the carrying of firearms. So really, I get this call all the time. People say, "Oh, what about Heller? What about this case?" And I said, "Well, New Jersey is basically an island of its own, and that has no applicability. We need our own case here, or in our own Supreme Court, or a different Supreme Court case that focuses on, basically a state like New Jersey or something similar with such restrictive carry permits." As Alexander says, we have the law that says this is what it takes to get a carry permit, but unless you're a politician or a judge or somebody like that, you're not getting it. You're just not going to get a carry permit.
Well, that may bring us into the second question that I think Dr. Sadeghi was going to direct.
Okay, this question is for Governor Florio and Mr. Roubian. Based on your experience, what gun control laws should be implemented?
Well, the one that's obvious is that everyone who wants to buy a gun should be subject to a background check. And that's not a big deal. I think most people would agree with that. I mean, also, we've got more than 300 million guns in this country. You have more guns than you have people. And what's really startling is that the response of some of the spokespersons for the position that the gentlemen have taken after the Newtown massacre, where all those elementary school kids were killed, the response of the chairman of the NRA was, what we need to deal with this gun problem is more guns. And after the massacre in the theater in Colorado, one of the spokespersons said, what we have to have is if everybody in the theater was armed, they would have got the guy who shot all the people before they got shot. I don't want to be too outspoken in saying this is insane, but it's really not the most rational thing in the world to say that the gun problem should be solved by having more guns. Everybody armed so we can all be self-enforcers of law. I don't think that really resonates. When we in New Jersey had the big controversy, when we banned assault weapons, and the efforts on the other side were to try to repeal the ban, and we were successful in stopping that from going forward, because we had the people in the state engaged and mobilized, and common sense prevailed. We had that. And I'm always struck by people saying, well, New Jersey has the strictest laws in the country. That's like saying you're the tallest building in Omaha. We may have strict laws, but they're not anything close to, when you still can have a 50 caliber gun in New Jersey, when you don't have the ability to have everyone subject to checks on their background. That's not a particularly strict law. What we ought to do is start getting common sense rules and regulations, put them into place on a national basis, because this is a national epidemic that we have.
Thank you, sir. Assemblyman.
I thought I was new.
Oh, did you?
Was I supposed to respond to that?
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry, excuse me.
Well, I don't know about this public opinion, but I mean, many people do contribute the fact that you lost your reelection because of your push for the assault weapons ban.
So what?
And
What does that
you
got
just
to
said
do
it was
with
public
anything?
opinion. You just said it was so popular, and that's why, you know, you were reelected. That's what a lot of people contribute, your failure to your reelection. So,
Let's move on from this.
okay, so but the
Gentlemen,
point
please.
here is that, you know,
Not personal.
I'm just saying, he made a statement about it was so popular, everyone wanted this, and many people contribute.
That's your own conclusion, sir.
Okay.
Can we move on to the next question? Whether
How many people-
The governor is
Okay,
reelected
well,
or
we're
not?
talking about-
There were other issues. I lived through it. There were many other issues other
Okay.
than what you're raising.
Well, I want to bring up the point.
You did.
Why is, if you believed in the strength of your convictions, why didn't you disarm an assemblyman? Why don't you disarm the State House? Why is the State House more important than the schools that we have? I mean, we protect you guys with armed guards. I know many politicians in New Jersey have a concealed carry weapon. So why aren't we not disarming? If the premise here that more guns is not the solution, right? Then why is the State House armed, you know, with hundreds of armed guards? Why, in the official state report in Colorado, this lunatic that committed those crimes, he drove past 3 different movie theaters to commit the crime, and the one that was gun-free zone had nice stickers on the front, this is a gun-free zone. This isn't the official report. He went to that movie theater because he knew everyone was going to be disarmed. He went 45 minutes out of the way to go to the one movie theater that he knew was going to be, you know, an easy slaughter, and that's exactly what he accomplished. So I don't agree with that premise.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to take the question insofar as it was addressed to the State House. Anyone carrying a firearm in the State House, they're state troopers. They're law enforcement agencies. That's a public place, a governmental building. It's the capital of our state. And I'm not aware of these politicians in New Jersey that you speak of that have concealed carry permits. But I will say that our statute, and I'll agree with Jef and Alexander. With regard to U.S. versus Heller's implications. Thankfully, Heller's, the holding in Heller did not have so much of a reach, and some might have called it radical in terms of coming down on the individual rights side of the Second Amendment debate, but it did not have that kind of a reach on New Jersey's law. New Jersey's concealed carry law has been upheld by the federal courts because of our reasonable inference that the dangerous and obviously deadly nature of handguns creates a need for a showing of particularized need to carry something, and that serves the state interest in public safety. The states in which concealed carry is permitted, we've had 440 deaths just in the past 7 or 8 years. 440 deaths. These atrocities were committed by folks who are carrying with a concealed carry permit. And that includes a dozen law enforcement officers, a dozen cops, and 428 civilians have been killed since 2007 alone at the hands of people with concealed carry permits. So I think that the fact that New Jersey's law is a bit more stringent in terms of a showing of particularized need as to why you have to carry a handgun if you're not a member of law enforcement has kept the people of this state safer than those in the states where there is not a requirement for showing a particularized need. And I think that even in New Jersey, we can still do more with regard to certain things that I can never understand why folks on the Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment side of the debate can't agree with folks in urban areas that actually see the impact of gun violence on our streets in our communities. That why we can't agree on things like large capacity magazine. Why any person carrying a gun lawfully under the Second Amendment would need a magazine that enables them to carry more than 10 rounds for no other purpose but to spare them reloading when we know large capacity guns were used in violent mass shootings over the past decade. That's something that I can't figure out why we can't agree on. Why we can't agree on, as the governor said, background check requirements for every gun owner in the country without any loopholes it shows, without and ensuring that those background checks reach the mentally ill and convicted criminals. that I can't fathom. There are 4 states in this country where concealed carry permits have to be issued by law enforcement as a matter of right to anybody who applies for one. So I think even in New Jersey, where we have been proactive in keeping our citizenry safe, I think there are still areas where we could close certain loopholes. That isn't to say that I think that the Second Amendment should be removed from our Constitution. I was a reservist in the Marine Corps, and I shot for training, and I went and got a firearms ID while I was in the reserves as a sergeant, and I own a rifle. And so I understand the purpose and the intent of the Second Amendment to begin with, but why we would keep certain statutes from being enacted or challenge them when there are obvious ways to protect our citizens and balance that against the interests of the Second Amendment, I think are just lost on me.
I mean, just to reinforce the point on the magazines, it is against the law to go hunting with a 30-cartridge magazine. So, I mean, the fact is, no legitimate person requires that sort of thing.
I beg to differ, but, I mean, listen, Wayne, New Jersey, there was a string of over 40 home invasions with 7 to 10 criminals smashing down people's front door and causing all types of violence to these innocent people in their own homes, all right? So you're telling me that because you make up an arbitrary number of 10, I don't know where 10 comes from, all right, that now I should limit my ability to a gang of 10 people that were invading homes in Wayne, New Jersey last year. I should limit myself to being able to defend myself? I mean, and to go on to your other example about self-defense, I mean, this is from the Department of Justice. It's that self-defense use by armed citizens exceeds 4.7 million times a year. 4.7 million times. That's from the Department of Justice. No independent group, no NRA survey, no Bloomberg survey. So that's the kind of people that you're stopping in New Jersey from protecting yourself. Does Dustin Friedman demand that Short Hills Mall, does he have a right to protect himself? Does he now satisfy justifiable need based on your definition that he has the right to defend himself? What about Carol Bound? She was murdered. Her last line of defense, she knew, was a gun. And she died waiting because politicians are saying, I know what's better for you. You don't need a gun. But meanwhile, these people left and right are dying.
Well, I was living in Wayne, New Jersey when all those string of break-ins were happening. And I can tell you that I'm not so sure everybody would agree that a handgun would make anybody feel safer. I think the problem with those strings of robberies and break-ins and burglaries had everything to do with drugs and really not a whole lot to do with guns. And again, I don't know if people in the, I don't think that people in their homes would feel any more or less comfortable had they had a gun if they didn't already have one. What I'm trying to say, and the point I'm trying to make is, really I think you need to go to the root of the problem. And if you believe that the solution, and I know you do, is to own a handgun, then so be it. But I believe that the solution would be to go to what the root of the problem is. Why were there so many break-ins? How do we prevent them? And more than that, let's address the drug problem that's going on in the suburbs that goes unaddressed, and most parents aren't even seeing it happening.
I can't agree with you anymore, and I think we should use the same logic. We should use the same logic with drugs the same way we do with guns. Let's make drugs illegal so no one can access drugs.
Okay, Alex, we just met and you're angry. I'm just asking you not to be angry. Like, I want to come back here next year.
I'm not angry, but you're making an argument about drugs,
Yeah,
but drugs
yeah.
are already illegal. So how much more illegal can we make drugs?
Okay,
I mean,
I'm not suggesting that we can make them any more illegal. I think what I'm suggesting is let's get to the root of the problem and find out
Absolutely.
what the problem is with drugs,
The New
why so
Jersey-
many kids are using drugs and so addicted to drugs, and why parents aren't even seeing.
and this
That's
is-
what I think
This
I'm
ties
saying.
in, actually, New Jersey Police Report. It's called the Urban 15. About approximately every year there's 300 people murdered in the state of New Jersey. Now, the Urban 15 makes up around 279 to 258 every year. So I'm really happy you brought that up, because why is it almost 90%, over 90% of the murders that are occurring in New Jersey are happening in the inner cities? People are disguising it as a gun problem, but in reality, let's talk about the poverty. Let's talk about the education. Let's talk about the broken homes. Let's talk about the drugs. Because I can guarantee you go to Saddle River, New Jersey, or Alpine, New Jersey, there's no illegal gun problem. There's no drug problem there. That's the problem. We have to get to the roots. I agree. What do all these cities have in common? Poverty, lack of education, broken homes, drug abuse. Let's talk about. I would love to have a discussion about the root of the problem. Because, I mean, I travel all around the country, and all the places that don't have those issues don't have a problem with violence.
And that's important because instead of focusing on that, what we always hear about from the other side is, oh, we need background checks, we need this, we need that. That's not going to solve those problems. So the legal gun owners that, shouldn't have to go through the whole problem of just trying to get a gun, let alone exercise their right to carry one to protect themselves, they're not the ones that are going to be committing those crimes. They're not going to be adding to those statistics. And yet, nobody wants to address that aspect of it. They want to say, oh, there was a mass shooting where 7 people got killed. Well, what about all those people and those families? Why don't you talk to those families and ask them how New Jersey's gun laws are helping their families out? I'm sure they'll have something very interesting to tell you.
Well,
That's kind of a zero-sum mentality, that you have to take one problem and the other. We should solve both these problems. Poverty and the other types of programs or problems should be associated as well. Just throw into the mix as well the whole idea of gun accidents, children getting holds of guns, suicides from guns. So there's a whole lot of dimensions to this problem, all of which should be addressed.
Well, that brings me to the next point I wanted to put out to the panel in general, and that was we've had the Supreme Court rulings, we've had these tragedies, yet nothing has been done positively by Washington to address this, and we realize that each state has supreme on their own gun laws, and that's a problem as well. As the prosecutor said, guns from other states are coming in through here. So I would like to briefly hear from each panelman. What would you do? What do we do? It's not a summation of your remarks. It's that we have all of this violence, all of these mass shootings, school shootings, and nothing positively has been coming out of our government to address the situation. Why is that?
Well, let's start with the premise that there's not a whole lot our Congress is getting done right now. They're at a standstill, and they're constantly at a standstill. And it's amazing to me that they get anything done. And I don't say that, I guess I am saying it as a criticism, but I'm also saying it as a reality. I mean, that is the fact. I'm going to put it out there because I understand how Washington operates, and the NRA is a really strong gun lobby. And that's not to say that is the only thing, but it is a strong gun lobby. Good, bad, or indifferent, that is the absolute truth. So I would tell you, Judge, that would be my response to your question.
I would just say that, the fact of the matter is, the House of Representatives recently rejected an effort to have background checks. 80% of the people in the country were polled, said they support that. Notwithstanding that, the Congress didn't respond to their constituents. They responded to the NRA. The NRA is a very powerful group. It's a cadre of people, some of whom you've seen in terms of feeling very strongly about this. Single issue voting. And that's really the way you're going to be able to cope with this problem ultimately. Is to get enough people to feel that this is so important that they're going to vote for that. We're going to look at all of our Congress people. We're going to see how they vote, and if they vote the wrong way on this issue, we should be forming people who will focus exclusively on this issue. It's the only way you'll get it done. And the NRA is commendably very organized, very well financed, largely financed by the gun manufacturing industry and gun dealers. You talk to real people who are sportsmen, people who are hunters, the vast majority of them, who are friends of mine, say, there's no question about the fact we should have background checks. I don't want terrorists with guns. I don't want insane people with guns. We should be doing that. So the organization, which focuses on the manufacturing industry, the NRA focuses on gun dealers. Largely, this is about money. This is all about money. And so that's the way we're going to have to educate people about this issue and get them focused on it, and that'll be the only way you'll change things.
Mr. Henninger?
Well, the vast majority of people that buy guns, and I don't care what state you're talking about, buy guns at some type of store, a Walmart, a Dick's Sporting Goods, your local gun store. All of those people have to pass a background check. It's called the NICS background check. This whole gun show loophole thing that you hear so much about accounts for such a small fraction of the purchases. It's not even an issue. And yet we can't point to too many cases where we could say, if this person just went through the proper background check, then this wouldn't have happened. You can't predict behavior. You can't predict, there's no way to predict that somebody's just going to snap one day. there's a lot of people that would have passed all sorts of background checks, and they still decide to do something. Just like we don't outlaw knives. People get stabbed every single day. People decide to just run through a crowd in their car. The Oklahoma City bombing, they didn't use a gun at all. People are going to want to kill people, and they will find a means to do it. We don't just start outlawing cars and outlawing everything else. The issue is that the NRA does not cast votes for every politician. Luckily, the majority of this country in other states grow up with more common sense gun culture, and they get it. It's only because New Jersey, we are so urbanized, we don't have the hunting culture, we don't have the gun culture here, that people just get scared because they don't grow up with guns. All they see is all the shootings in the urban areas. The politicians tell them that guns are the big enemy, and they just say, yeah,
Well,
okay.
true, but that's not the only issue that we have with that, obviously. We have some states have the death penalty, capital punishment, others don't. Some states can sell marijuana, others choose not to. The laws from state to state, states' rights versus the federal government has always been at the issue here. Now we have all of these states regulating their own. You're right, we have these issues here. We're trying to say, what is the, not solution, because we don't have magic among us, but what should we be doing to try to control it? Now, I want to ask Mr. Roubian, but I also would like to hear from the Assemblyman first, and then from you, sir.
Sure, thank you, Judge. I think we found some common ground. I
hope so.
think that
That's the
I
purpose of this, I
absolutely, I absolutely agree that poverty, education, broken homes in our urban communities are problems. And as the governor said, it's not a zero-sum game. These are problems that merit our attention. But and poverty, education, broken homes are certainly part of that equation. But you talk about outlawing knives. A poor, uneducated kid from a broken home is going to be able to do a lot less damage without a gun. Adam Lanza could not have killed 20 kids and 6 adults in the period of time that he had available to him with a knife. That is the inherent danger in violent crimes committed with guns. That's just the reality of the situation. When, Judge, you ask about what steps we can be taking in order to curb gun violence, specifically as it relates to guns, because there are other problems in our communities that we should be addressing as it pertains to violence on our streets. And we talked about some of them. But as it pertains to guns, there are certain things that ought to be done without debate. And 90% of the public, according to the Washington Post, 90% of the American people support the background check measure that the Senate and the House respectively have failed to act on. The Senate last in 2013, the House more recently. There is no reason in any state in our union that we should permit people, dangerous Americans, people with certain types of criminal convictions, certain felons. There's no reason that mentally ill individuals should have the right to carry a firearm. They put the public in greater risk. Large capacity magazines. It's not an arbitrary number, right? The data has shown, voluminous data has shown, the number of violent incidents that could have been prevented, or the losses of lives that could have been mitigated if limits like that had been in place. We're talking about, in some of these cases, firearms that were purchased lawfully and then used in violent crimes time and time and time and time again. And that's why in those first world democracies throughout the world that are like totally confused why the United States has the laws in place and are as lax as we are about guns and possession of firearms, and it's no surprise to them why our incidents of violent crimes involving guns are so much higher than in those countries where they take a much more stringent approach. And the last area that I'll note for this answer, Judge, and fellow panelists, I think, is data. I can never figure out why the gun lobby opposes bills that would create repositories of information and track data related and create clearinghouses based on the tracking of firearms that are used in the commission of violent crimes. Why wouldn't we want to know about where these guns are coming from? Why would we oppose legislation that would track exactly where they're coming from, when the serial numbers are scratched off, when those guns are put back into the stream of commerce or the black market and then used again in a violent crime that could cause injury or death to an American or law enforcement officer? Why those sorts of legislation are opposed, I'm at a loss for.
Thank you, sir.
In similar
Mr. Rubin,
vein,
well,
the gun organizations have opposed the ability of the Center for Disease Control to look into health consequences of this, the statutory prohibition there. Statutory prohibition that the NRA worked for to stop people from suing gun manufacturers who are negligent that result in damages. So this is one of the few industries where you have a statutory exemption from liability for things that have been done. That again is an indication of the power of the NRA particularly.
Mr. Roubian.
So, Assemblyman, you're a Marine?
I am, that's right.
Trained in an M4, correct?
That's, well, M16.
Okay, M16.
Yep.
How long did it take you to change a magazine when you were serving?
A few seconds.
A few seconds? Okay. It takes a fraction of a second for me to switch out a magazine. I don't even know where to begin with this. It's like saying, let's ban Ford Mustangs so they can go triple the speed limit, and if a drunk driver were to get, into a Ford Mustang and drunk, he could create more harm. I mean, it takes fractions of a second to change a magazine. Adam Lanza is an example you brought up. The official report. The beauty of this is, ladies and gentlemen, you could go home, go onto FBI.gov, or pull up these reports yourself and read them. No emotional arguments, no fabrication, anything. Adam Lanza did not even use the full magazine capacity. He was switching it out like a video game, just shooting a couple people, switching it out. 4 or 5 rounds, shooting it out, mixing it around. So if I carry a 30-round magazine or I carry 3 10-round magazines, it makes absolutely zero difference in my opinion. Going back to the federal and state laws, in 2013, 48,129 people lied on the federal 4473 form. In brevity, it's just a form you fill out. It's a federal background check before you buy any gun in America. Now, of that 48,129 people, only 4 people were convicted of lying on a federal form. That's a felony. All right? And if you think that people are going to go to a gun store, lie on a form that they're not a felon, or they're prohibited from buying a firearm, and that they're going to stop there, that's the problem. I don't hear anybody ever talking about, let's go after the people that are actually breaking the law. Here's a perfect example, Prosecutor. I'd love to get your opinion on this. Man illegally sells guns in Bergen County, gets probation. He sold 7 guns to undercover police officers who portrayed themselves as violent gang members. And this man was actually putting guns on the street, and he gets probation. But I have friends of mine serving multiple years in prison. Jeff can tell you about our members, and Brian Aiken, who was sentenced to 7 years in prison, lawfully acquired firearm, no criminal intent, hyper-technical violation of New Jersey laws. He was sentenced 7 years in prison. That's the kind of stuff that irks me and makes me upset. Why aren't we going after the criminals?
Well, that question, just from the lifetime I spent on the bench, in plea bargaining, there's another aspect to it that perhaps never hits the paper, such as information given on other agencies that are doing things or informants. And many times a person gets sentenced that the public say, what kind of sentence is that? When they've actually behind the scenes, maybe, to use the expression, dimed out a lot of higher ups in that whole
I
process.
think there's clearly more to that story than
Correct.
what the newspaper's
yeah.
reporting. I believe you. I believe
Yeah.
it's in the newspaper. What I'm saying is that I agree with the judge. There's a lot of information that's not put in the paper because I
And
live
it's
it every
sealed.
day.
It's sealed for
So,
protection.
yeah, it's whether it's sealed, there's a lot that doesn't go in there. So what that says to me is that probably did happen. I'd love to know what the backstory is or what the full story is that happened. There has to be more.
But that's not always the case.
No.
It depends on what county you go to. You can go to one county, and if you do something, I mean, I had a client that had a carjacking case in Essex, and I got that dismissed. You can have a guy that has a burglary, first offense in Somerset, he's going to jail. It depends on where you go, it depends on who the lawyer is, it depends on
And
what the judge is.
it depends on your proofs. It depends on how credible your witnesses are. It depends. There's
always.
a lot. Not always, but I'm just giving some examples for the people here in the public. As I don't know, Mr. Roubian, if you're a lawyer, but lawyers know the nuances, and you certainly are well read in this. I think the members of the public do not necessarily know that it may vary. It
Well,
varies
we
for
see
a lot of
that
different
way too
reasons.
often. You know, 2 weeks ago, I see a lot of my friends put it on Facebook. This guy was sentenced, he murdered someone. He murdered someone in Irvington, was sentenced to 5 years, presumed to get out in 2.5 years. Anyone else in this room making a technical error, no violent act, would get mandatory 5 to 7.
Yeah,
You know,
I-
just because I'm not gonna rat out other gang members should not make me get less, crime. And I think this is something we should all agree on, and we probably do agree on. I think it should be mandatory, like in Florida, 10, 20 life. You commit any crime with a firearm, as a law-abiding citizen who respects my rights, if you're going to commit a crime with a firearm, you should get, I would say, 20 years.
But you have bills right now that are being put before the Assembly and the Senate, aren't they, to give prosecutors the ability on simple gun possession by someone who comes out of state with a lawful gun through New Jersey? I've handled a lot of cases like that, and people have gone to prison for it because they were mandatory, just like I handled 18-year-olds with a couple of bags coming back to parties with their drugs, going to prison for 3 years without parole, when they were no way near a drug dealer, just going back to have Saturday night parties. The laws get put in, they tie the hands of the prosecutors, they tie the hands of the judiciary, and then as it works its way through the system and we see individual cases, they start to say, well, maybe the prosecutor should get more discretion, maybe the judge should get more discretion. It's happened with drugs, it may happen with guns. However, I think you had another question that you want to put to the panel. Actually, Assembly, I was going to ask you another question. Is anything going on right now in New Jersey with, these issues and these shootings? And I know our drug laws, second to New York, are the toughest in the country.
Sure, and yet there are still some gaping holes in the law. And there are other areas in which maybe some things can be done to afford jurists and prosecutors greater discretion. Mandatory minimums often create a myriad of problems unforeseen by the legislature that saw fit to enact them, and not just in the gun arena, in the drug arena and others. But, we attempted a veto override on guns for the mentally ill. There was a bill that would have required New Jerseyans seeking to have their mental health records expunged in order to purchase a firearm, have the state police notified, as well as the county prosecutor and the local police department. The bill really passed with bipartisan support, and then there was a veto override attempt that was unsuccessful. There are limits. There was legislation to limit the large capacity magazines to try to follow New York's lead in terms of the SAFE Act, which was responsive to Newtown. That was conditionally vetoed. There's a bill, A4182, prohibits individuals convicted. It expands the list of disqualifying offenses to include carjacking, gang criminality, racketeering, and terroristic threats. That individuals convicted of violent crimes broader than the current list ought to. And these are individuals that have already shown a clear disregard for the law. They're in the category of, I think, the criminals that you were referring to, Alex, and they shouldn't be trusted with the same rights that responsible gun owners have. So that passed the Assembly, and other legislation like expanding gun buyback initiatives and establishing a criminal criminal justice gun repository, data clearinghouse of sorts, based on guns that were found on the street or used in connection with a violent crime, and tracking that to improve the data that we have in discovering where this stuff comes from. Those are some of the bills that are on the table. I think it's safe to say the majority has had a difference of opinion
Is
with the
about
governor
50
on some of
caliber
these.
prohibition bill as well?
Yeah, the 50 cal bill's on the table. In response to the Jersey City ordinance that was stricken with regard to the one handgun a month, because of the overwhelming data that showed that the straw briar problem could have been at least hurt. You know, these aren't going to end. These bills aren't going to end gun violence, but if we can reduce it, if we can save even one life, any of these bills will have been worthwhile. And the legislature passed, under the previous governor, the one handgun a month bill was passed at the state level. The 50 cal ban is out there. Again, I don't think that's something that the governor would sign, that this governor would sign. But
It's
What
amazing
What
that,
would be regarded as the legitimate need for 50 caliber armor piercing?
I can answer that question because I actually do long distance target practice. I mean, and that's exactly why I want to use it. I shoot 308, 446 LaPois, and a 50 caliber. And I drive 3 hours to Pennsylvania sometimes to use that rifle in a long distance 1,000 yard competition. And you're forgetting your really important bill of A890, which bans predominantly a majority of my firearms that I own. So,
I wish I could say I was sorry.
I know you're not, but the fact of the matter is that even after Florio's assault weapons ban, crime skyrocketed. It's right here. 1989 to 19, it didn't reduce any crime. You know, and if anything, Mr. Florio said in the New York Times that supporting a ban that said that even supporting, I'm sorry, even though assault
You mean
weapons.
Governor Florio, is
I'm
that
sorry,
what you're
Governor
referring
Florio, I'm
to?
so
Yes.
sorry.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Assault weapons bans were not used in any murders. Any murders in the state in 1989, they were the weapon of choice for drug dealers. So just because things are now the weapons of choice for drug dealers, which, why don't you just go after the drug dealers? That still blows my mind. But a 50 caliber has never once been used in a crime in New Jersey, and you're trying to ban a firearm that first of all, costs $25,000, weighs 50 to 60 pounds. It's not something that some gangbanger in Newark or in Jersey City is going to be carrying around.
Mr. Roubian, you're giving us all reasons, but no controls. Do you believe there should be just no gun controls and do whatever you wish to do?
I'm not saying there's no controls. If you want to put an exemption that if this gun were to be used in a crime or during the commission of crime, that's one thing. But you're just blatantly, I have collectible firearms now that I have to worry about where am I going to ship to my brother in Florida or my friends in Pennsylvania to store for me because your law, your proposed bill, is going to ban them. And they've never been used in a crime. The only people it's going to affect is the law-abiding citizens. You think the gangbangers in Newark and in Camden and Trenton are going to say, oh man, Assemblyman, he passed a new law, I gotta go turn these in. Do you honestly believe that?
Can we revisit, because I was unclear on it, what was your proposal that you said you would be okay with the control on a 50 cal if what?
If it was, I'm saying is, if you wanted to increase penalties, like let's say, I don't agree with the hollow point because it's been ridiculously distorted. People that have been arrested for whatever, drunk driving, the guy had a novelty bullet on there of the hollow point and he got charged with possession of hollow point ammunition because it's a attack crime. But I mean, I have doctors that have $25,000 custom-made 50 caliber rifles. They hand load, they do all these things. They're emailing me like, what am I going to do with my rifle? And this happened in 2013. I said, we're working on it. And luckily, the governor vetoed it. But this is the state police telling us that a rifle that never was used in a crime, you guys are trying to prohibit because of just fear-mongering.
Dr. Sadeghi?
Okay. My next question is for Prosecutor Suarez. Can you share your perspective on gun buybacks and whether you think this is an effective strategy to curtail illegal possession of guns?
It's funny, I'm looking for my chief, we were just having this conversation before we left the office. And he'll tell you it's hard to measure, and I agree with that, because every gun that you get, it has an untold story. You don't know what could have happened with that gun that you get. Just by point of reference, back in July of 2013, the prosecutor's office, in conjunction with the Attorney General's office, had a gun buyback in various different counties, but specifically in Hudson County, It was Bayonne, it was Jersey City, and it was Union City, and there were 3 houses of worship that people could come to, and they could turn in their gun. And it was hugely successful in obtaining about 600 guns, I think it was, one day, one Saturday. What's tough to measure is it really getting the dirty guns off the street? Is it really good in getting the guns that are used in a crime off the street? Well, the hope is that, yes, it does. In some regard, maybe it's an old gun that some person had in his or her closet and wants to give it up. And in another regard, maybe it's a really angry wife, mom, girlfriend, brother that wants to turn in the gun because they're just pretty much done with all of the gun violence that's going on in the street. That's my hope. When I speak to some people, it ranges from it's a really wonderful idea to you're just getting some old guns off the street. I don't think it hurts. I don't think that there's no detriment to having people come, turn in their guns if you want to, and as I said, the hope is that they turn in a gun that someday would have been used in a crime to hurt somebody, to kill somebody. You'll never know that story because that gun will never go back out onto the street. But that's my position on it. I anticipate having one at some point. I don't know when it'll be.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, all right. I mean, in my opinion, I've had a lot of police chiefs tell me that it doesn't do anything. But what happens a lot in these instances, in these cases, and this is why I'm very vocal about the buybacks, is you have grandma turning in grandpa's old World War II M1 Garand. That rifle is $1,500 to $3,000. But what happens is instead of like taking those firearms, selling them, and Jef and I actually worked with a lot of police officers on this and trying to get some legislation pushed that would take those firearms that are very valuable and sometimes blatantly deserve to be in museums and sell them on a private market, transfer them out of state or sell them or transfer them to an FFL and give that money back to the police departments to buy body armor and better equipment. But that was quickly shut down. I mean, I don't know why anyone would oppose that. Why not take these old historic firearms? Some of them are junk, $25 rifles, whatever the case may be. But I had a woman last summer call me up. She had 3 rifles that were from her late husband, and they were extremely valuable, collectible shotguns. And she goes, I want to turn them in, and there's a buyback. I'm like, send me pictures. Her son sent me pictures because she had no clue to use a computer. Ended up being each rifle $5,000 to $8,000 that she was going to just turn into a buyback for $25, beautifully engraved rifles. And instead, I hooked her up with one of my dealers, one of my organizations that's an FFL, and he was able to give her a fair market value for it, and then turn around and sell it over to a. Just
so we're clear with gun buybacks, we're not reselling them to anybody. We destroy the guns.
I know.
Now I understand that you can appreciate a gun and that you can appreciate the fact that a very valuable gun might be something that you would want to put in a museum. But I don't think your argument is very different than me cleaning out my grandmom's attic and finding a watch. If I don't care to educate myself as to what the value of the watch is and I want to give it away, or if I want to throw it in the trash, well, it might be a shame, but that's my choice, isn't it?
But the problem there is that most people in New Jersey think it's illegal to even own a gun.
Well, I don't know if you could speak for most people in New Jersey as to what they believe or what they know. I just simply think that that's really for someone to decide for themselves.
I attended 2 in Newark over the past 2 years. Many people had no idea that they were even able to legally inherit it, as well as being able to transfer it. And
then shame on them for not educating themselves, right?
I'd like.
I'm curious as to what your dealers think about this whole thing. They want to get access to these guns?
Well, what we were working with the police officers and the dealers was that the police officers would do an inventory. They would actually check the firearms, make sure they were never used in a crime. And then from there, dealers would be able to buy them. Federally licensed dealers, FFLs, would be able to buy them. And then the money, the contributions of the firearms that were surrendered to them would be used to go back to the police departments for better equipment, better body armor, things like that.
And I was at that meeting, and I can
And he was
verify
actually at that meeting.
That's what they were interested in, because, many years ago, I actually interned at a prosecutor's office in the weapons room, and we saw valuable weapons, Tommy guns, things that are worth a lot, even more than $8,000, very, very expensive. And I said, well, why aren't these being auctioned off or sold? No, their policy is destroy everything.
Destroy it.
I'm like, well, don't they know how much it's worth? Yeah, they know.
We're not in the business
Well,
of making money, just so we're clear on what we are in the business for
Well,
doing.
I believe that perhaps, I remember that there was some, before your term started, there was some recognition of valuable memorabilia type guns that I think the office had worked out something rather than destroy them to put them in the hands of collectors or something. But that was prior to the prosecutors.
And the rationale for the sales is to get the guns out of
Oh, it's
circulation.
true. Right.
To go pay money to put the guns back into circulation seems to be less than thoughtful.
Well, we have, at the risk of incurring the wrath of all of the panel members up here, we are at that point, I think, that in fairness, we have a lot of patient people that have been sitting out here, and I think some would like to ask some questions. But in keeping with, and so we have a microphone. Jay will go around, give it to you. But I would ask you to, obviously, this is an informative kind of discussion, and we'll keep the questions to within the proper framework, as I'm sure we'll all do. And if you don't, then I have to earn my keep here, I guess.
Thank you, Ron. Patrick Cullen. Is it on?
Yes.
Patrick Cullen, retired Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army, New Jersey Army National Guard, New York Army National Guard. It's been said that politicians give us the Bill of Rights. We have two politicians up here, and I'm sure they both attest to you that it's not the politicians that give us the rights, it's the soldiers. And I salute Commander Florio, who was my Commander-in-Chief of the New Jersey Army National Guard, and a fellow NCO here, Sergeant, for your service. It really behooves me how Mr. Roubian, I'm not addressing your question, I am mentioning you, I apologize, but I'm not asking you, I'm addressing it to the governor. But it really amuses me how Mr. Roubian was citing the First, Third, and Fourth Amendments, talking about how it gives people rights. And it amused me that people of his political leanings tend to just want to cut off the first part of the Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia, actually was read by the judge, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Considering that, Your Honor, considering Governor Florio, that we just lost a strict interpretation list of the Supreme Court, and you actually addressed some of these issues of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and the militias.
Is there a question? Is there a question?
Yes, there is a question here.
Thank you.
Just as in New Jersey, where we have driving is not a right but a privilege, according to Chapter 7 of the Driver's Manual, and this well-regulated militia talks about the rights conferred to the people in the militia, not the people that want to have 50 caliber practice and drive 3 hours out to Pennsylvania. I couldn't care less about your weapons, sir. All right? Can't we possibly...
I can care less about your opinion.
Yeah, all right. Can't we... Fine. Can't we possibly agree that the rights for the people in the military and also the rights of the Chief Detective Rubio, I don't know if he's carrying or not, I'd rather be protected by his weapon than your weapon, all right? Because he's trained and you're not.
What's
So,
the question?
well, here's my question.
Can we
Yeah,
get
here's
the
my
question?
question.
It's not, I understand what you're coming from. I understand it's emotional. You're very erudite.
Oh, yeah.
Please ask the question.
Yeah. And
To whom are you
my
asking?
question would be, then, we don't have to re-legislate, do we have to re-legislate the Second Amendment, or can we simply have a strict interpretation of the Second Amendment and allow the people in the military, and by extension, of course, law enforcement, to carry weapons, and everyone else who would be a privilege, like driving a weapon, a Mustang weapon that you talked about earlier, and have that as a privilege and highly regulated, all right, rather than getting a debate about how many weapons does it take to shoot Bambi. Thank you, Governor.
Well, let me just respond in a broader sense. I mean, no right in the Constitution is an absolute right. First Amendment is freedom of speech. You cannot go into a theater and scream fire. I mean, there are limitations on our rights. And the question is reasonable. Is the reasonable restriction on a right compatible with the basic principle of the right? And in this case, as we said earlier on, guns are your right under the Constitution, and I think your interpretation with regard to the militia is probably the appropriate one, but it's not the prevailing one at this point. The fact of the matter is, though, reasonable restrictions on guns are permissible and encouraged under the law. As I said, Judge Scalia, who was the most basic proponent of original intent, clearly acknowledged in the case that we've talked about today that there is a reasonable right for restrictions. So the question is, what's reasonable? And then the question becomes, issue by issue by issue. Is it reasonable that 40% of the gun owners in this country have had no background check? Most people would say, that's not reasonable. That's too many people free from any restrictions on guns.
Do we
That's
have another?
something that's not-
Thank you, Governor. Another question?
So
Jay?
I get called out and I don't have an opportunity to respond.
I don't think anybody's calling you out, sir. I don't know what that means, calling you out.
They're clearly addressing me and attacking me, so.
Sir, I don't think anybody's, we'll have to move on because we have a finite number of people, and obviously, Ms. Ripken, you'll have a lot of chance to state your
I'll
position,
let it pass, don't worry.
which you eloquently do, by the way.
Hi, my name is Brett Sabo. I'm a member of Moms Demand Action in New Jersey. I guess my comment,
What is Moms Demand Action?
Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, we're a grassroots movement that started the day after Sandy Hook, and we have a chapter in every state in the country.
Thank you.
Part of the frustration, I think, is this disconnect between the leadership and what the people actually want. I know one of the bills, I'm sorry, I'm nervous.
Take your time. You're doing excellently well.
One of the bills that Moms has backed was the domestic violence bill in New Jersey that the Assemblyman voted for, that passed in the House and in the Senate and was vetoed, and the override didn't go through either. And also the federal background check not passing. It seems like the NRA leadership is not representing the NRA membership necessarily. It's 82% of NRA members support background checks, 94% of Americans support universal background checks. There is a lot of common ground out there, but it seems like the NRA leadership does not want to acknowledge that, does not want to accept that, and therefore a lot of the representatives of the people do not get represented. They get, they don't get their fair representation. And that's a big frustration because I think there is a lot of common ground, but I don't think that the people who make money off selling guns wants there to be.
Thank you.
Can I just point out something that
Go ahead,
I've noticed, and I understand the
Thank you,
purpose of the panel is that we're here talking about the general aspect of the Second Amendment, but what's really lost here is the fact that almost nothing that we're talking about, other than a few things the Assemblyman mentioned, almost nothing that we're talking about here actually applies to New Jersey. The NRA has, and Alexander can attest this, the NRA has no real impact or anything in New Jersey. There's no real presence of them here. A lot of these things about background checks, every single person in New Jersey that buys a gun has to go through a background check. So a lot of what we're talking about here is not focusing on the fact that in New Jersey, as a gun owner, you have almost no rights. As I said before, it's so difficult to just purchase a simple gun. There are so many ways to actually get rejected. It's ridiculous. And a lot of people don't even get approved or rejected. They just don't get a response, as I've indicated before. And then we have bills like the mental health expungement law, and I do more mental health expungements than I believe any other attorney, otherwise I'm in the top 3 or 4 in this state. And what's put out there is that we have to pass this law because crazy people are getting weapons. What you're not told is that in order to get a mental health expungement, what you first have to do is hire a psychiatrist. And what just about every judge is doing at this point is requiring that psychiatrist to testify. And the judge has to find that you meet the criteria. And then you then go apply for a gun permit and go through all the background checks that anyone else can. So there are no crazy people at all, using loose terms here, that are going through this process where we need the prosecutor's office involved. They cannot cite to one person. They're just doing this because they want to make it as difficult as possible for legal gun owners, people that have seen a psychiatrist, where the psychiatrist will testify that they're not suffering from any issue. And I can tell you that a lot of these clients that hire me, it's stuff when they were a kid. When they were 15, they were 16, they were 18. And now these people are in their 20s, 30s, sometimes 50s or 60s. And they're getting hung up because they're in the NICS database and they can't buy a gun because of something that happened 34 years ago when they were a kid. And they need to hire a psychiatrist and go through a very expensive and long process. But now we want to add an even further layer upon that because gun rights in New Jersey is just a way to get free, cheap headlines. It's ridiculous.
Thank you, counsel. We have another question.
First, I think that this is a great institute. Thank you, Congressman Guarini, for this and for all the participants. statement. I am a proud graduate of St. Peter's College. Back in the day, Dr. Konaki was my political science professor.
He's now the president of the
And
university.
he's now the president, yes. And Jay, you're doing a great job here. Question. I am interested in your thoughts, specifically judge, governor, prosecutor, assemblyman, if you will, no offense to the others. With the recent passing of Justice Scalia, do you think that President Obama should make the next appointment, given that we are in a presidential election year? What are your thoughts on the attempts by the Judiciary Committee to block what might be coming? Or do you think it might be more prudent, if you will, put the politics withstanding, Democrat or Republican, whomever succeeds President Obama, whether it's Hillary or Donald or whoever it is, okay? My question is, what are your thoughts specifically? Again, what do you think the process should be in terms of the appointment of the next Supreme Court nominee, in terms of with respect to where we are at now with the state of affairs in the country concerning the election of our next president? Thank you all.
Well, not being naive, but the President of the United States is Obama, and he's elected to the end of this year. And he was voted by the people because most agreed with what his principles were and policies were. So his rights include nominating a vacancy in the Supreme Court. This is the goal of every president, is to nominate a Supreme Court member, because the legacy that Supreme Court justice, and most of them are into their 80s and 90s before they really leave us, should be the duly elected. Now, is that going to happen? Probably not, because we are in an election year. But in a perfect society, Obama should be able to nominate who he wants, who would probably be the polar opposite of Antonin Scalia. So he's got a slippery slope to try to get through, and probably won't be successful.
Are you pushing for the nomination?
I've already turned it down. Primarily because this is on my...
Obama, so.
No, this is primarily on my resume, so this is, I guess, a mark against me. No. You agree, Governor? I mean, you're...
As a strict constructionalist,
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is the Constitution says you're not a president for 3 years, or you're president for the entire 4 years. You have a responsibility. It goes beyond just discretion. A responsibility to put forward a nomination. The Senate, on the other hand, has a responsibility to consider that nomination and agree or not agree. I think the political aspect of this is that some people in the Senate don't want to vote. They don't want to vote yes, they don't want to vote no. So they're going to try to make sure that even if the president makes a nomination, which I suspect he will, they don't want to take it up, don't want to have the hearings, because when they conclude with the hearings, they have a responsibility then to take a vote. And people don't want to vote, which is a sad commentary on leadership, but that happens to be a fact.
And as it gets closer to his lame duck status at the end of this year, then obviously that's going to happen. Another question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Pamela Johnson, Jersey City Anti-Violence, and I'm a proud peacock of St. Peter's University, receiving my master's degree in May of this year. My question is for Governor Florio. I really appreciate your stand to connect gun violence to a public health issue. I recently had a meeting with our Director of Department of Health and proposed the same thing, and I was proud that she agreed that it is in fact a public health issue. I want to know, why do you think that so many states are kind of resistant to making that connection and having those resources from the Department of Health?
Well, I think it is the fact of the lobbies that work very hard to preserve the right to have no restrictions on guns, or virtually no restrictions on guns. They're very powerful, very forceful. I mean, in some states, not as much New Jersey, but in some states, they dominate. There are now arguments about making guns more available on college campuses, in church congregations. I mean, I look at these things and I say, what the heck is going on in those places? Why do they need more guns in schools and places of that sort? And I think it runs counter to, I think, the ethic that exists in New Jersey, But in those other states, they have, those forces that are at work are very powerful.
Assemblyman?
I think that's exactly right. I think that the CDC data collection effort is a no-brainer, and everyone on both sides of the issue, on all sides of the issue, not to suggest that it's black and white on every single issue related to gun violence or the possession of firearms. I think that the CDC data collection issue is something that should be championed by all sides of the debate, because who doesn't want to be armed with accurate data when you're making your case? You want to have the same facts before you argue the law, as Prosecutor Suarez or Judge Callahan would tell you. Similarly, we all should agree that we want good, accurate data. And when you see the spate of mass shootings or how gun violence has plagued the streets in our urban communities, including here in Jersey City, which has not been exempted from that national spate of gun violence, there's no reason that we shouldn't be treating it as a public health issue, because I think it is one. And to answer your question, sir, not only do I think that the President has the obligation under the Constitution to appoint a Supreme Court justice to fill the vacancy, and that the Senate has a constitutional obligation to give him or her a thumbs up or a thumbs down vote, but the political branches are elected by the people, and a Fox News poll, had Americans, I think 2/3 to 1/3, saying that they wanted a justice appointed and considered right now. So that. Thank you.
Yes, do you have, Bill?
If I could actually make a mention about the
Sure, go
CDC, because President Obama's first executive action, he did allot $25 million to the CDC for gun violence research. And that report came back with, it was practically a waste of money, in my opinion. Came back with nothing conclusive, came back with nothing that would have changed the conversation or that could have been used in being able to reduce violence.
And we talk about data. There's no data to support the mental health expungement bill, and yet we have data that shows Brian Aiken, Shanine Allen, and my new client, Carlo Valerio, are innocent people that are getting hung up by New Jersey's gun laws, and yet Brian Aiken wasn't arrested yesterday, and yet we still don't have a loophole, not a loophole, an exception to the law to allow people like Brian Aiken to avoid going to prison. So where is that data?
Yes, Mr.
I'm Bill Armbruster, St. Peter's alumnus.
We do have other people that didn't graduate from St.
Right.
Peter's.
First of all, my question is for Mr. Roubian and Mr. Henninger, but I do want to say, Governor Florio, you were a great governor. Thank you for your service. It's a tragedy that you were not reelected. But my question for you two gentlemen is, would you support any kind of restriction, or is it your position on gun ownership, or is it your position that anyone should be able to own a gun, any amount of guns, any type of guns, no background checks, nothing? Is there any restrictions at all that you would support?
Well, we already have this. We have very extreme and strict laws in New Jersey, which have been in effect.
But that you would support, because you obviously
Well,
don't
because,
like it.
okay, here's the issue, is that people say, oh, background checks, but to what point should a background check be invasive on people's rights? We have people waiting year after year. I don't think that's constitutional. And the problem here is that, we had the technology to have background checks done instantaneously. In 2000 to 2002, I was a software developer. I worked in a major project with International Trade, Department of Defense, and the Customs House brokers on doing a domestic terrorist watch list, making sure they don't import or export anything on a national and international level. So instantaneously, I can do a worldwide search if I import or export anything from America to find out if someone is a convicted felon, someone's a domestic terrorist or international terrorist, someone hasn't paid their taxes. And the fact that we can't do that on a national level with the federal NICS, or that I can't do that, that's the problem here.
But do you support any restrictions?
I just said I support legitimate background checks that are not going to take 2 years to do. Most people get a federal background check done, they're in and out in about half an hour. And the problem here is that, you know, everyone's already getting background checks. You know, people talk about this 40% loophole, 40% of people are not getting background checks. You know, here's another, in Department of Justice, the study right here, I can dig it up for you. You know, less than, I think it's 0.004% of firearms used in the commission of a crime actually stemmed or came from a gun show. You know, so that's not the problem. I mean, I have pages of articles of how criminals, law enforcement,
Mr.
government.
Rubio, before you keep going into that, because you raise an interesting point, and I think it's an excellent question. I'd like to know too. You're saying 2 years is too long, and I don't think I disagree with you. 2 years is too long, but I think you said most people can get a background check within a half hour. Is that what you said?
That's correct.
That's correct.
How thorough a background check can you do within
Extremely
a half
thorough.
hour?
Go to
Okay, elaborate.
FBI.next.gov. It's an entire, I just watched it this afternoon. It's multi-point. It checks 5 different databases, from domestic abuse to having a restraining order, to having a criminal record, to having a mental issue. Checks multiple state and federal databases to make sure people are not prohibited from owning a firearm. And that's done practically instantaneously on the federal level. So unfortunately in New Jersey, that system was implemented in 1966. So instead of having police officers in Jersey City patrolling the streets, they're doing glorified paperwork, secretarial paperwork in an office, making sure, you know, paper after paper, people are not prohibited from owning a firearm. I've been trying to push, and maybe the Assemblyman can help me with this, automating and streamlining the New Jersey system. And also, because the mental background checks, they're paper. You go to the county clerk, they go to the basement, and they pull out some paper forms, seeing if you've ever been adjudicated mentally ill. I'm trying to push to have that digitized, so that, forget about guns and any issue. We should find out instantaneously if someone has any form of mental issue that can affect anything.
Yeah,
You know? But because I'm a Second Amendment supporter, I'm already doors closed on me.
Exactly.
You know,
Well, I mean, I would agree with you that all this should be automated.
Well,
And
the privacy laws, I mean, we're talking about this one amendment. There's 9 other amendments. There's the Bill of Rights. There's, you know, we are focusing on one thing, but, you know, in this day and age, instantaneous information about everybody can be found out. The question is, it seems to be that you believe that this is being purposely dragged along instead of being done more efficiently. So it's denying people who lawfully
Assemblyman,
want
you can
this.
answer my question probably. Why are we not automating and digitizing the, first of all, we can repeal it and just go to the federal NICS.
Yeah, I would just say that the door is never closed to you in my
Okay, so you'll
office.
give me your cell phone after this and we can talk about this?
My cell phone's on my business card, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I heard you gave your cell phone number out, so that's why I thought that was good.
okay.
Because I think we should have direct access to each other. And, you know, quite frankly, I can point out a lot of vulnerabilities in the New Jersey system because it is paper-driven, and it's not digitized, and it's not effective. It's not
When you
efficient.
say vulnerabilities, you mean somebody being licensed that shouldn't be licensed to have a
No,
gun?
not that. How people can find ways of getting, you know, guns and being able to, you know, circumvent the system.
Our time is running. We have a few questions from
Can
other...
I just mention, because he did mention me?
Yes,
is
Mr.
that-
Henninger.
Is that, you know, I don't represent the NRA, Alexander does not represent the NRA, so what some other person from some organization in another state argued there is not what we're arguing here. I think that one of the biggest problems I have, and I think Alexander would agree, is that we have a law on the books, but that's not being followed. And then we have the Jersey City that does their own thing, and they get taken to court, and the appellate court tells them no, and they say, we don't care, we're gonna do it anyway. So it's this, and then we have some police departments in one area of the state that says, the law says 30 days, we're gonna get you your gun permit decision in 30 days. And the other departments say, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And that's the problem is, the laws that are already on the books are not even being followed. I'm not, and Alexander is not, and there's no organization that I'm aware of in New Jersey that is saying that everybody should just have a gun and it should just be handed out like candy and there should be no background check.
Exactly.
Nobody's arguing that, and yet because we support the Second Amendment, we're branded because some other person in some other state said something as being the same. We're just asking for common sense, and none of that's being done here in New Jersey.
Governor?
Let me just say candidly from direct experience, there are people in New Jersey that are opposed to any restrictions whatsoever. And the real serious problem is that those advocates for that position are out there telling people who are members who are interested in sports, interested in gun ownership, they're told if you let anything go through, that's the slippery slope. After something goes through, they'll be showing up at your house to take your shotgun away. So that's the real problem. It's not even a rational analysis. It's this fear that is instilled in legitimate gun owners that anything being done will be the first step to confiscation.
Well, I don't know who those people are because Alexander represents, and I am their legal counsel for the largest gun owner organization in this state, and we are basically on the front lines in this state, and I don't know any other organization that has more than a handful of members that is contrary to basically what we're doing.
How large is your membership?
We have several thousand members throughout the state. And actually, we have a lot of membership throughout the country because once people flee New Jersey, they still pay their membership dues.
Collateral effect, I guess, right?
Yeah, sympathy.
Yeah. Would you, you have another question? Do you have a mic?
Oh, another member right there.
My name is Frank Hulster, and my question is for Governor Florio. In your very first comments this evening, you referred to gun violence as an epidemic and compared it to diseases such as tuberculosis and polio, I believe. And you said that the difference with the disease of gun violence is that while no one opposes the eradication of polio or tuberculosis, there's this group of people on the other side of the issue when it comes to gun violence. And presumably, I think it follows that that group is made up exclusively of legal gun owners like myself, sportsmen, target shooters, hunters, even, an elderly person who might have a shotgun for self-defense in their closet. So my question is, following that logic, do you really believe that I and other legal gun owners are in support of disease of gun violence and that I'm a contributing factor to that disease?
I believe that the people who are arguing against reasonable restrictions on firearms are not advancing the public interest. And so the debate becomes what's reasonable and what's not. My thought about the legality of cop killer bullets, for example, is not a good public policy position to be in. Likewise, with regard to basic checks, random checks on people, those are things that we can debate about, but I would argue the vast majority of people think that those positions are unreasonable. And so I think that's the policy debate that goes forward.
Thank you, sir. Do we have another question?
Hi, my name is Joe Ventola. I'm also an NJ2AS member. And I know I speak for myself, but I think I speak for most Second Amendment supporters. The frustration in New Jersey lies mostly with the ineffectiveness of these laws. Let me give you an example. The 30-round magazine limit. A magazine is a box with a spring in it. I personally called 4 Pennsylvania gun shops and said, I'm from New Jersey. He said, I'm sorry about that. And I said, if I wanted to come and buy some 30-round magazines, would that be a problem? He said, not at all. I asked 4 firearm dealers in Pennsylvania. They all said, well, what you do with them once you get across the border, that's your risk. My point is, I can make one out of sheet metal. I own a 3D printer. There are plans to make one on the internet. Would I do it? Absolutely not, because I'm a law-abiding citizen. So this notion that someone who's going to do a mass shooting, who I believe 100% of the time plans ahead, they stockpile, they order things on the internet, that this law is going to stop that, defies logic to me. Okay? The point is, and even Senator Weinberg admitted to me personally, she knows criminals and psychopaths don't follow the law. So this is just one example. This 30-round magazine limit, there are 1 million legal gun owners in New Jersey. This law will turn us all into felons overnight. Not only that, it will cost us millions to comply. All of us, people who never would imagine, not only do we have clean records because we own legal firearms, we would never imagine. By the way, there's a question coming.
You anticipated my next comment.
We would never imagine doing anything like that. Okay, so that is our frustration. This law that, legal, citizens can't carry a firearm. I had a gun put to my head when I lived in Irvington. That person didn't care about any firearm law. So I prep, and the question's right after this. I personally polled 71 New Jersey law enforcement officers, and growing. I asked them, should a citizen who is well-vetted, a law-abiding citizen, be able to carry a firearm in New Jersey? 62 said yes, provided they're well-vetted and trained. The point is, that person who stuck the gun against my head didn't care about any firearm law. But what I do for a living, I'm a superior court mediator. I'm a dispute settler. I'm a peacemaker. These laws control me, someone who's not going to hurt anyone. But you limit my ability to defend myself, my family. So my question is, please explain how these laws do anything to protect us, to help keep law-abiding citizens safe. And I only gave one example with the magazines, but there are others. Thank you.
Assembly?
Sure, Judge. Thank you, sir. And I'm very sorry for the experience that you had as a crime victim, and regret that you had to go through that. No one should. When it comes to other crime victims, like the parents of the victims that they've lost permanently in Sandy Hook, or in Arizona, or in Columbine, where large capacity magazines were used, here's what the laws would do. I think you're absolutely right. Someone who's dead set on committing a violent crime, who isn't concerned about being charged with murder or armed robbery or the litany of other indictable or felony offenses in other states, whatever, they're not going to be concerned with firearms laws. That's true. But if a limitation, for example, the large capacity magazine legislation could either make it more difficult or thwart their effort to acquire a magazine that serves no purpose other than to spare you the minimal step of reloading a magazine, or if they came in, or if they had if it was easier and they did acquire, if Adam Lanza or any of the shooters in some of those mass shootings where large capacity magazines were used had to take this step, and that was a fraction of a second. Alex, you said it takes you a fraction, not even 1 second.
Come to the range of me.
A fraction of a second to change a magazine. All right.
7/10 of a second.
Using my example, I said a few seconds, but at the very least, without debating the semantics, you have to eject the magazine, you have to retrieve the new magazine, you have to reload it, and that's not weighed against the backdrop of the nervousness or everything going through the head of an active shooter, which adds something to the dynamic of what's happening when you're actually live firing, and that could cause them to fumble. That could save a life. That could save a dozen lives. And even that minimal delay of a few seconds could give the pause that's necessary for a SWAT team member or a duly trained law enforcement officer on the scene to take out that shooter and to save additional lives, to spare additional children from an untimely death. I think that extra step, the minimal effort to hinder a crime like that would justify it. Even if one life is saved, I think it will have been worthwhile. Weighed against the nominal inconvenience of you having to reload a magazine that's 10 rounds instead of 15 or 30. Other laws, you mentioned the 3D printers. Yeah, that's a major problem that Congress has enacted on the Undetectable Firearms Modernization Act, that you can literally print out an AR-15 equivalent on a 3D printer, and it can pass through metal detectors undetected, and that's a loophole in the current ban against plastic weapons. That has to be acted on. We have to keep pace with technology. That's not a matter of existing laws not being enforced adequately, and you hear that argument. That's a matter of new policy having to react, or in some cases be proactive to prevent deaths at the hands of violent criminals. And I think that there's been some agreement that even with Second Amendment advocates, that violent criminals shouldn't possess these weapons. And if that's the case, then that's the purpose. That's what these laws, I think, could hope to accomplish. That would be my answer, sir.
Can I just point out real quickly that we keep talking about these handful of mass shootings in other states that have killed dozens, maybe 100 people, and yet we just heard earlier the statistics from the doctor about one county and all of the people that have been mowed down, and I doubt any of those people that would have been saved if this 30-round magazine law were put in place. And the fact that we keep talking about these laws, about what happened in another state, and yet people, minorities, are being gunned down left and right in the state where we have the strictest gun laws, and nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about how are we going to solve that. Instead of worrying about these other bills, why isn't that the public epidemic? Why isn't that being discussed to save these people from being mowed down every single day? NJ.com, Irvington, Newark, Jersey City, Patterson, murder, 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 murder. Nobody cares.
Just so we're clear, I spend a lot of time talking about it. I think it depends on what circles you're in, frankly. I mean, if you're in your circles, I think you spend a lot of time talking about whether or not more legislation should be passed. In my circles, we're constantly talking about it. So there is plenty of discussion about the illegal guns that are on the street, the illegal guns where minorities are killing minorities. There's plenty of discussion on that issue.
The Assemblyman hasn't discussed one bill about that.
Yeah, but
He's
here's-
a number of bills,
Jeff.
none of that addresses that.
Jeff,
This is gun.
Here's,
gun
I mean,
discussion.
this
we're
is
getting
just-
towards the
yeah,
end of
this
our
is just
time.
what blows my mind. Your laws, what you're supporting, what you advocate, you can't keep guns out of the hands of criminals. You want to legislate accessories? I mean, let's just think about that for a second. Even if there was a gun with a 1-round capacity magazine, and you could keep that out of the hands of the criminals that are plaguing our streets with tens of thousands of crimes every year, right? And then the second kicker is that what you're actually advocating for. Are you familiar between a single stack and a double stack magazine? Mm-hmm. Okay. What you're actually advocating for, and this is a picture, I have it here. This is a 15-round magazine. This is a single stack 7-round, right? What technically you're advocating for is for criminals, and the difference is that these are more prone to actually failing, right? And because, look, you have the ammunition staggered. This is a single stack, hence the name. You're actually advocating for criminals to use more reliable magazines. Adam Lanza, his firearm jammed because he had a big 50-round drum. So what's next? You're going to say, well, let's ban, single stack magazines because, if we can save one life, the constant emotional argument with no facts, just were you in the room when any of these crimes were committed? No, but the reports show otherwise. So I just don't understand. It's like saying let's make buying a car harder for sober people so we can prevent drunk driving. You can't keep guns out of the hands. You have to accept the fact you cannot keep guns out of the hands of criminals, and you want to legislate with A890 accessories, thumbhole stocks, pistol grips, collapsible stocks. I mean, come on, we've got to be honest here. If you want to have an honest conversation, let's have an honest conversation. But not with misdirection and just this utopian, if we pass this one more law, we're going to stop, gun crimes.
Well,
I'd feel much more comfortable if our friends would be supportive of national restrictions, because part of our problem in New Jersey is illegal guns being brought in from other states. So if they want to sign on to the fact that we're going to deal with these problems on a federal basis, that would be a little more...
Well, federally, they're already barred from owning firearms. Federally, straw purchasing is already illegal. So, how about we focus on the criminals that are committing these crimes? Why are they getting... It's like what do they call it? The revolving door justice system in New Jersey. They come in, they come out. I mean, the cops told me had they arrest someone, next week they're arresting them again because they're back on the streets. How many of these convicts, prosecutor, can you tell me, do you reconvict over and over and over again? Because I read the stories, and a lot of them are just going back for the same crimes over and over and over again.
Again, I think that has a lot less to do with the guns, and I think that has a lot more to do with other problems that have gone unaddressed, such as drug use, and there have been attempts to address it. Drug use, we have a drug court now, and there are more problems. And if you want to go into it, we could go into the social welfare state, the poverty,
the
lack of jobs,
education.
but these are all other issues and not related.
Well, I know that we have reached that point where we'll be ending our program, and I know there's a lot of other people who would like to make a statement or ask a question, but there's an end to everything, and we have reached that point here. I want to thank everyone here. No one is going to repeal the Second Amendment. And we realize that the majority of crimes being committed on the street are by people who do not have licensed revolvers or guns. However, as in every legal issue that we've had, there has to be some place that we start to curb the flow. And that's the kind of dialogue and these dialogues that we need to start so that people understand that the constitutional rights given to us in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and the privacy that we have there has to have a balance against the security of the rest of us. And until we address these issues in forums like this and then start to put them into legislative actions, we're not going to be able to stem the tide of this terrible plague that has hit our country here. With in the classes I teach, every day we seem to go on TV of somebody else killing somebody else, whether it's street violence or going back to their employers or whatever reasons that they believe should be the reason to take another life. I want to thank everybody, and Dr. Sadehi, do you wish to add anything?
Just thank you, everyone, for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at some of our future events. We've passed out some flyers where some of those topics are listed with the dates and times, so thank you very much.
Thank you all.